Hey, how's it going, Champagne Sharks? This is Trevor Beaulieu. We have with us Eric Levitz from New York Magazine. How's everything going?
It's going as well as in pandemic adjusted terms. I'm doing all right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You have to kind of rate these on the curve. But if you tell the people who you are, what you do, what makes you qualified to do what you do, or why anyone should listen to you, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I did. It's a good question. I am a senior writer for New York Magazine's Intelligencer. It's a politics and news vertical on the site. Been doing that for about 5 years now. And yeah, I just try to read a lot of history, political science, and news, and try to put myself in a position where it's weird in journalism today. I think in the old days coming up, you would sort of start out as a reporter on a specific beat and just really put in your time, gaining sort of expertise, gathering information, and then you might graduate to become a commentator. Um, Whereas when I entered the industry, with online journalism and the need to produce at volume, you kind of had people lowest on the totem pole doing bloviating, because that's really easy to turn around really quick. You can just form an opinion and write it. Whereas if you're allowing someone to report, then you're kind of actually saying, okay, I'm willing to only get, 2 pieces a week from this person because I really trust I'm going to give them the time to actually report a piece. So that put me in a position coming right in, and being in a blogger sort of position of trying to actually put myself such that I actually had something worthwhile to say. And I'm still working towards that, but I think I've gotten
I
more
mean,
expert.
that's something that attracted me to your writing was because I'm not great at politics, the nuts and bolts of it. I'm talking like the unsexy, non-sensationalistic parts, and I want to get better at it. And um, I found you with the recent Jimmy Dore piece, and what I liked about your piece when it came to that, with the forced to vote AOC, was I felt everybody was kind of trying to see which way the wind was going to blow, and I want to make like a personal brand on that. And this is sexy. This is emotional. I'm going to pick my side. I'm going to be a booster of the squad, or I'm going to be uh, position myself left. This is the post Bernie landscape, and you just had a very thoughtful, and it was like the way you made it. It wasn't hyperbolic. You weren't really. You were making a case, but it wasn't very emotional, and it was the kind of thing where, whether or not I eventually agreed with you, because I'm still taking in the information, but I am leaning more toward your side. You at least, I felt, gave a very objective aspect, and then the comments were totally not that. I don't know if you saw your own comments,
I
but
don't read those. Yeah.
good call, good call. But it was like everything that you said, no matter how thoughtful it was. I like to take the idea that probably all the thoughtful readers didn't bother to respond or reply in the comments, and only the knee-jerk emotional people got in there. But yeah, I remember I read it, I was like, oh, this is a pretty thoughtful thing, and I want to find a nice thoughtful counterpoint, so that maybe I can do a nice synthesis of the two and figure out. And I said maybe the comments will have that, and nope, nope, not at
Yeah.
all. But what you described, I think, is the reason for it. This kind of online ecosystem, or this certain thing, does not really reward. Between that and the Twitter hot take uh, economy, and I'm pretty impressed that you managed to be on Twitter. You managed to write about this in at a place like New York Magazine, that I think is very on the cutting edge of the whole media ecosystem, but still manage to carve out a thoughtful space for yourself to give yourself room to think. And I was wondering, I mean, clearly from what you said, it's a deliberate decision, but I was wondering how hard that is to do sometimes, because I imagine the pressures have to be otherwise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I first started out there, I was on the hook for like 3 to 5 posts a day. So when you're producing at that volume, it's hard to be especially thoughtful. It's hard to, if you're going to try to challenge your readership's sort of core assumptions rather than sort of affirm them, that takes more time and effort and words to kind of say, like, I know you think the world is like this, but here's why, like, your fundamental assumption is mistaken, and this is how that relates to what happened in the news that today. That's harder to do than to whatever. So like a New York Magazine, I think it is more, at least when I initially came on, a sort of normie Democrat kind of audience to just find like, oh, here's what a crazy Republican state legislator in Nebraska proposed today, and look how stupid this is. Which can be fun, but yeah, I have though been able to get a bit more space and my editors actually have been very indulgent as far as letting me. I think that AOC piece is like 4,000 words on this really kind of, in the grand scheme of things, pretty small controversy between two factions of like, a relatively small portion of the American left. But so they've given me room to stretch my legs and make the kind of arguments that I'm interested in.
But you know what I like about that piece, right? That you just touched on. One thing we try to do with the show is we try to always think, even if something is relatively small and is overblown and trending for whatever reason, there's probably a bigger learn you can get from it. So rather than just buy into the topical hot takeness of it, we try to use like the eyeballs or the interest that the hot take topic has and try to make something that's more about, more teachable and long-standing. And I think you accomplished that in that article compared to a lot of other things I've seen about it, include about that controversy, including from the primary parties involved. You don't just get into the here and now, but you explained the whole landscape of the debate in a way that I thought was like some of the things that you mentioned about how to interpret the polls of when people say casually that Medicare for all poses very well among the Democratic base. You give it a context that I didn't quite realize. And if you can like give an example of what you were talking about as far as what you need to contextualize that poll result.
Yeah, sure. So there's a few issues with that. So one is that Medicare for all does poll really well when you ask people, do you support Medicare for all? Or when you ask, do you think that every American should, how do you feel about giving Medicare to every American? And that was actually, I think, the wording of the poll that was most often cited, and that was cited by Brianna Joy Gray in her article, which showed that like 88% of Democrats, large majority of the public, supports Medicare for all. But the Kaiser Family Foundation and several other pollsters have shown that if you get more specific with people, so basically the American public overwhelmingly supports the concept of universal health care, overwhelmingly supports the premise that it's the government's responsibility to make sure that everyone has health care regardless of how much money they make. Those ideas are indeed really popular. But if you ask specifically, do you want to make it so that that your plan will change, that there will be no private insurers, everyone on a single government plan, or do you want Medicare to be an option that you can get the public Medicare plan or what you have now? People very much prefer the public option in that framing. Then separately, actually, when people are asked, just presented with the government, just presented with the option of single payer, there's going to be a national government plan. Kaiser describes it as, do you support like Medicare for all, a system under which all Americans would be put into one national insurance plan? That also polls with majority support. But then a large majority of the people who say yes to that, when you ask them right after that, So under Medicare for All, would you be able to keep your current insurance? A majority says yes. They don't quite internalize what it means. And separate from that, there was, at least in 2019, a poll that showed a majority of Democratic voters, I think, essentially saying that they preferred Medicare for All to just the status quo, I believe. But then when asked, do you want Medicare for All or do you want to build out on the Affordable Care Act, they preferred building out on the Affordable Care Act. Now, one point that I really emphasize, or that I make in the piece and that I emphasized on Twitter, is that polling can be used for two different purposes. And one purpose that polling is often used for, issue polling specifically, is to sort of claim the mantle of democratic legitimacy and popular legitimacy, right? We have the people behind our side. And I think, in trying to figure out what do the people actually want? If American public was fully informed about all of the relevant factors on a policy issue, what would a majority of them say that they wanted? And on that front, I think that a lot of the polling that I just mentioned, there are very reasonable left-wing objections to them, because saying, do you want to have the option of buying into a Medicare plan or keep your current insurance, sort of obscures the fact that if you are reliant on employer-provided insurance, keeping your current insurance isn't actually necessarily an option for you, right? And in fact, maybe what you most value is actually your healthcare providers, is keeping the doctor that you're familiar with, and your employer can switch your insurance without your consent, or you can lose your job. So if we're talking about, so if we ask people, in real detail, okay, like here, I'm letting you know, like, here's the data about how private healthcare prices are increasing year upon year in our unregulated private system. Here is what would happen to your premiums if we did Medicare for All. Yeah, your taxes would go up, but whatever. If you gave people perfect information, I think that a majority would support Medicare for All. But the relevant question for the force the vote context is not about a world of perfect information. It's about the world we actually live in which the opponents of Medicare for All have enormous power, both just financially in terms of being able to fund propaganda campaigns, because the healthcare sector currently, I think, is like worth 18% at least of American GDP. So that's a real indictment of the healthcare sector, that it's taking up that much of the economy. But the fact that it takes up that much of the economy means that just an extraordinary amount of money is in the hands of hospital and pharmaceutical and insurance lobbies. An enormous amount of people owe their jobs to the private healthcare system as currently constructed. And so both in terms of funding campaigns, but also in terms of being able to organize the organizations that represent doctors, the American Medical Association opposes Medicare for All, opposes even a public option. Basically, there's real loss aversion among the public, so that people really, if you propose something, if you propose nationalizing the insurance industry and really downsizing, eliminating a bunch of administrative jobs that are redundant to make our healthcare system more efficient while making it universal, poor people who don't have health insurance right now, if they aren't organized by the left, are not even really going to be paying attention to this debate. They're not going to be putting pressure on lawmakers. But people who are told by their employer, hey, if this bill passes, you're going to lose your job, all your colleagues are going to lose your job, those people are going to get on the phones to their congressperson. And so this is like the issue. It's about issue intensity. It's about the power of these groups. And what the Medicare for All polling that I'm referring to suggests, in my opinion, is that the support is fragile, that people generally like the idea, but they're open to counter arguments. And we know that those counter arguments are going to be extremely well funded. And so that's part of why I think that the force the vote people didn't have as much power on their side as they seem to believe.
And I think something that you mentioned kind of in passing in the article, but that I think is a very great point, is that, and I think it's almost part of the problem, during the time that Bernie's running, it was in their interest to kind of overstate what the meaning of the poll was and to decontextualize it. And it makes sense because, you know, in a hot and heavy campaign, you have to use all the weapons at your disposal. But now that it's over, this is kind of a different context, and something that made sense to slightly misrepresent during the campaign now has different consequences. And I thought that was a pretty good point, that it made sense to leave that context out. But now we're in a position where people have to actually deal with the nuts and bolts of making it a reality. And in this situation, on the floor vote, it's much tougher. It's it actually hurts to walk into it with these misconceptions. And
yeah,
go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, right, yeah, in the context of the Democratic primary in 2020 and 2016, but, you know, you're trying to win a primary, you're trying to win on the most left-wing platform that you can, and to move the Overton window and whatnot. And Democratic primary voters are obviously going to be concerned about electability. And the primary argument, the main argument against your campaign is that, you know, a 78-year-old socialist isn't going to beat Donald Trump. So in that context, you want to point to polls that suggest that actually no, Medicare for all is overwhelmingly popular. And separate from that, at least during the campaign, you know, one thing we know now that we didn't know at the beginning of the 2020 campaign was that faced with a very large field of Democratic candidates, and God knows how many debates that began with a really lengthy debate on healthcare specifically. That was really of all the televised debates, they almost all began with a long debate about Medicare for all or healthcare. The Democratic primary electorate picked the candidate with the most moderate healthcare program in the entire field. I don't think that they nominated him for that reason. I think they nominated Biden because they liked him. He was Obama's wingman. But it does suggest that that's not a deal breaker, at the very least, for the Democratic primary electorate. And since the force the vote strategy, I think, was really focused on the notion that maybe we don't win the vote, we don't win Medicare for all right now, but we expose Democratic incumbents to their base and make them easier to primary. I think that you know, it's just a relevant factor that the Democratic primary electorate seems like it likes the idea of Medicare for all, but it's not, doesn't appear to be disowning Democratic politicians who don't support it.
Now, I'm gonna ask a very basic question, and this is super basic, but I don't want to assume any knowledge on the part of the audience. Why would doctors and the healthcare field be against Medicare for all? Like, what is their tangible stake?
Yeah, so basically, and there's some generational differences. There's my brother is a young doctor who you know, he tells me all the time, you know, just what a nightmare it is where he has these patients that he knows the medical procedure that this patient needs right now, or their life is going to be, you know, potentially endangered, and then he's waiting 2 days wrangling with insurance bureaucrats to get the procedure approved. And I mean, he's all for single payer. It's a, you know, a nightmare, a bureaucratic and ethical sort of nightmare that he has to navigate. But generally speaking, American doctors make, I think, I believe, in 2 to 3 times in some specialities more than that than doctors in Europe and in other systems where the government, where they either have a single payer S system or they have a strong government regulation of prices. And specifically with Medicare for all, the legislation, I think that the proposals that I've seen, the way that they make it affordable, the way that Bernie, the reason why there were some studies that came out that showed that, you know, actually the U.S. would spend less on healthcare overall with Bernie's Medicare for all plan than under the status quo, even as it expanded coverage to millions of people. The reason you're able to do that is because you change the reimbursement rates that doctors receive you lower them, so that right now Medicare pays doctors less than private insurers do, and now all of their payments would go down. So basically, until Medicare for All advocates present a plan that does not threaten doctor salaries, which such a plan would require even higher taxes, which would be politically difficult. But until that happens, doctors are, for self-interested reason, going to oppose reform, because they're making way more than they probably would under a government system.
Yeah, because I think it's important, because I think people know that it hurts their bottom line somehow, but people don't actually take the time to find out or learn the specifics. And I think that's something that helps contextualize and make tangible exactly what people are up against. And something I want to ask you, I'm not going to spend too much longer on this because it's a long article and I want people to actually read it. I don't want people to think that they can just get a quick summary and get it. But you give us bigger framework that I thought was pretty useful, and you take a couple pages to lay it out before applying it to how it affects this case. But can you explain the conspicuous tension in progressive electoral analysis, where you it's a kind of like a 4-element thing, where you talk about how the paradox of the role big money plays. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I'm seeing a comment that, the other issue with doctors is that medical school is incredibly expensive, and so that's another pressure for them to not want to take a reduction in their salaries. But to your question, so basically there's a tension that I noticed in some left-wing punditry, where we sort of stipulate that that the corporate media is biased against the left, is hostile to the left, that corporate media exerts influence, that it manufactures consent, it exerts influence over the public, that the corporate media is hostile against progressive candidates, but then also that there is no actual electoral cost or plausible cost to nominating a progressive candidate versus a moderate one, or that there's no real electoral incentive for Democrats to avoid antagonizing well-heeled special interest groups, and that they only do so because they're corrupted through campaign donations. But to me, that this is that there are ways that you can reconcile this tension, because it is true that there are some things that that wealthy interest groups and that corporate media is hostile to, and that ultimately they're just too popular with the public, and they don't threaten whatever. They're just so overwhelmingly popular that it's hard to stop them, like the $15 minimum wage, which gained traction. Or that just, we have a really well-organized opposition constituency on X issue, and so we can overcome that. And also that, in the abstract, corporations, the idea that the Republican Party is beholden to the rich and to corporations is a real asset for the Democratic Party. Being perceived as the party of working people is electorally valuable, so there is a cost-benefit. But when you get to the point where you're really suggesting that there's just absolutely no way that Democrats are choosing to lose by not running on Medicare for All, there I think you just get into a point that doesn't make total sense to me, because corporate influence can work through the channel of campaign donations, but it can also work through going directly to the public and influencing public opinion, and then voters actually being the mechanism that actually disciplines Democrats. So one thing I mentioned was that in Illinois this November, there was a ballot initiative to allow the state to adopt a progressive income tax. Right now, Illinois' constitution actually forbids the state from taxing the income of its wealthy residents at a higher rate than those of everyone else. They have a flat tax. So the proposal was to allow tax increases on people who make over $250,000 a year in order to help avoid budget cuts, as the state, was already kind of in a bad fiscal position before COVID. And so you have a situation where voters were directly asked, like, do you want to essentially, objectively suffer more cuts to social spending and investment in the state, or do you want to raise taxes on a very small minority of the richest people in the state? And that was supported by the Democratic governor, Pritzker, who is himself a billionaire and who himself invested a lot of money for the campaign. But there was, I think, like $100 billion spent against it. And they were able to convince a majority of people who voted, even as they went and voted for Biden, they voted against progressive income taxation. You saw in California where Democrats extended labor rights to Uber drivers, and then a very well-funded campaign turned a majority against that in Prop 22. So, and then we've seen, then in Colorado, state-level single payer is a little bit of a different proposition than federal. It is, like, objectively a little bit more challenging, but nonetheless, when that was put on the ballot in 2016, single payer in Colorado lost by 50-something points. So we see through this that the constraint on progressive policy is not just operating through corporations donating directly to the campaigns of politicians, but also, being able to buy media advertisements and just exert kind of cultural influence through their power within the political economy.
And how would you respond to this by Yakub, where he says, well, first off, is this your argument? And if it is, what's your response? And if it's not, what would you say your argument is? But he says, so his argument in relation to the polls is that there will be a media backlash funded by healthcare interests. Aren't they already doing counter propaganda? And so what would change? I'm not sure if what you said already responds to that, but I wanted to give him a chance to ask that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think if you check out the article, I think it'll be somewhat clearer. But what I'm arguing is basically that, first of all, the existing public opinion on Medicare for All is not as solidly supportive as the advocates of force the vote suggest. And I think that number, the current polling number, is likely to decline as the opposition to Medicare for All gets more organized and starts spending more money on propaganda. It is true that the healthcare lobby is already spending. And it is also true that they spend against the public option every bit as much as they spend against single payer. Those two things are true, but they are not spending the way that they would if Medicare for All was actually moving through Congress and it actually had a chance of passage. There you would see they have a tremendous amount of ammo on the sidelines. That's one issue. The other issue is that, with the public option, the polling on the public option, however accurate you think that the framing of it is, it's consistently I think 70+%. So you're working from a higher, that's probably going to be pushed down by propaganda too, but you're working from a higher sort of top. All of this said, the argument isn't about, that Democrats shouldn't do Medicare for All or that we couldn't pass it. The Affordable Care Act was, I believe, 20 points. It was really unpopular by the time that Congress passed it because although Obama triangulated and bought off the opposition of some of the healthcare lobbies, he didn't get everybody on board. So there was a lot of stuff spent against that, and the status quo bias that the American public displays. The majority of Americans who get insurance through their employer and say that they're relatively satisfied are pretty easy to scare and freak out with lies. And so the Affordable Care Act was really unpopular, but Democrats went ahead and voted for it anyway because they believed in expanding, healthcare access in their neoliberal way. and they suffered a major electoral backlash. But that it looks like in hindsight that was probably inevitable, and they could have gone and passed a more ambitious and like gotten a little bit more bang for their buck, a bit more, gotten us further along to universal health care, if they were going to get wiped out anyway. My argument in the context of the piece is just about, is it realistic to expect that by forcing the House vote and getting this national debate over Medicare for all, that we will radically change political reality to the point where actually this year there's a chance that we could get it through the Senate and make Medicare for all a reality, or that that we would be able to dramatically increase our chances of replacing moderate Democrats in the House with more progressive Democrats in the primaries by exposing their opposition to Medicare for all. And I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think there's very much reason to believe either of those things are true if one looks sort of harder at both the polling data and at what has happened in places where they've tried to move the ball on Medicare for all, like Colorado and Vermont, when the lobby started kicking into gear and started messaging, and you saw support plummet.
Last thing I would say about this before we move on to the Capitol riots and other transition issues is, I know a lot of people, just based on like the comments to your article, because I know it's assuming a lot of people even read it. I know how discourse is now. A lot of people are going to take what you're saying to be like, don't buy, everything's one extreme or the other. So if you're showing reservations for this current strategy, the assumption is going to be, oh, so he's saying he's a Democrat chill. He's saying keep everything the same. Better things aren't possible, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to give you a chance to actually clarify what your prescriptive side of things is and what you actually do believe. I mean, maybe you do believe those things, but I want it to come out of your mouth, or the alternative to come out of your mouth.
Yeah, no, it's a reasonable question. I mean, I haven't spent as much time recently prescriptively, and I don't know exactly in the immediate context, like what, right now the question is what is the biggest thing we can get Joe Manchin to in terms of what's going to happen here, and I'm not 100% clear on that. I do think that one, this is somewhat tangential, but one thing that I've heard some, sort of more reformist progressives starting to talk about is, Medicare for all is a funding scheme. It's a way to increase coverage and bring down costs. But one other problem with our healthcare system that potentially would have support from Manchin and other sort of moderate Democrats from more rural areas is figuring out ways to expand the supply of healthcare. So as far as like places that either need to keep hospitals open that are failing or build new hospitals, how to get more doctors into the system by either taking more physicians from overseas, making it easier for them to come here and practice. A bunch of reforms for like sort of just so that there actually is like more healthcare resources that people can access that could potentially have an effect on prices, but also just make it so that, people who don't lack access to healthcare because they live in a certain region. Separate from that, I think that we can, I think it's pretty clear that increasing eligibility for Medicaid and for Medicare, I think it depends on what you're asking, like in terms of like what, I would need to get better sourcing on what it is that Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, the people who are currently there, where they're flexible. I do think that people should organize nurses, younger doctors who are, based on not just my anecdote, but polling suggests that like millennial doctors, like their peers elsewhere, are just more left wing than the older generation. They have less cushy jobs within the healthcare system. They're not making the big bucks yet, to a certain extent. And you have, I think, Adam Gaffney's organization of Physicians for Single Payer. So building up support among those interest groups. And then there's potential to move the ball on the state level if you can get Congress to pass. I believe there's a bill that I'm still not totally clear on the mechanics of it, but would make it easier for states to establish either public option or Medicare for all. If you look in California, I mean, that's a state that Democrats dominate. Obviously, there's different kinds of Democrats because it's become kind of a one-party state. But I believe that's like the 6th largest economy in the world or something, California as a whole. You should be able to do single payer in a polity like that big if the federal government facilitated it. And if it did work well there, then you could see spreading it. And if California partnered with Washington and Oregon and formed like just a West Coast single payer zone, pretty ambitious, but nonetheless, just like in terms of like the arguments against state level single payer are often like if you're like Vermont, super easy for businesses to relocate to New Hampshire or for taxpayers to sort of flee or whatever. California doesn't have that problem as much. So there's a few thoughts at the top of my head, but yeah.
I just want to say real quick, even if I don't put something on the screen, if at any time you see a comment that grabs your eye and you want to reply to it, by all means, feel free. I'll put it on the screen. I just forgot to mention that off the top. Now, some of these other things that people are bringing up, I think are actually addressing your article. Like Yakub says that one of the important arguments surrounding the issue is that it would energize the progressive base. And you actually do give credence to the idea that that is a positive, that it will emotionally and politically mobilize the base. But I mean, and tell me if I'm being unfair here. I think what you're saying is that the downsides of that don't make it worth it to pursue in this particular way with the floor vote. So I would say that the best thing to do is read the article, because some of these things will be mentioned in there. We just can't. It's a 4,000 word article. We can't get into every nook and cranny of it. But yeah,
I will say that I didn't say this in the article, so just that.
Okay.
There is just what I allowed was that I think that it is the case if you were able to force this floor vote, which I'm not 100% sure, because moderates could counter sort of, could threaten to withhold their support for Pelosi if they did allow a floor vote. And so I'm not even sure whether the mechanics, whether you're actually going to be able to force a floor vote no matter what. But if you did, I think that would get a lot of media attention. And I think that could, provide, putting a spotlight on your issue is a valuable thing. I think just the other consideration is just you can energize people with that sort of thing, but you can also potentially demoralize people if you lose badly. I think, or I am not a political organizer, but my friends of mine who are, I think they tend to emphasize that like it's really, you're going to lose fights, but you really want to try to pick as many winning fights as possible because it builds confidence, it builds investment. People don't like losing. And so if you put a lot of energy and investment into something that you kind of know is not going to work out ahead of time, that's a pretty big gamble because you might be exhausting, some people who would otherwise maybe you attain if you were able to secure a victory and make them sort of feel a taste of power.
And last thing I want to say about this is not even a question. This is just a last thing I want to say is, I didn't have Eric on here to talk about this because I'm trying to push his viewpoint across and say, this is where I come down and y'all should listen to Eric. But so much as to say, I think this is one of the more thoughtful retorts as opposed to a lot of the more sensational ones. And I would just tell you guys, if you're looking to find a thoughtful retort to Jimmy Dore's side, I think this one was very much it. And if it doesn't sway you, no harm, no foul, So yeah, that's the way I look at it. And I'm also hoping that some of the people who are pro Dore will also look at your article, and some of the later takes might directly respond to some of your objections. So I want to move on to so many things. I invited you before the Capitol riot, and there were already things I want to talk to you about, but now this is, and you've already done two pieces. I was looking it over because I read I read two of your pieces in depth, and I was skimming some of the more recent ones. So you've already done two pieces on the Capitol riot, and they're a little shorter than the AOC one. But I wanted to know, has this Capitol riot thing been an extension of how you were forecasting the transition to go, and like the trends you saw like going forward, or has this thrown a major wrinkle in any way as to how you see the state of the union right now?
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I didn't expect. I did not expect a violent insurrection at the Capitol at all. I mean, I expected. I was sort of waiting for the shoe to drop of like, surely having the president of the United States tell like half the, I mean, what, like 70 something million of the country, the people who trust him enough to vote for him for a second term, telling him over and over again, telling them over and over again every day that your democracy is being stolen from you, that like they've rigged the election. And then knowing just like how he's played pussyfoot with these militia guys, and knowing how heavily armed everyone is. I've been waiting for the terrorism to start, but I didn't imagine it would be something as spectacular as what happened Wednesday, and what we've learned almost happened, in terms of a lot of very near missed opportunities for the rioters to make it all the way to the lawmakers. And it's very unclear. They beat a cop to death. I don't know what they would have done if they actually got their hands on Pelosi. So, yeah. So I didn't see that coming. And as far as I think that it has placed us in a point of like sort of really radical uncertainty about the future. I could see it not changing things that much. On the other hand, I can see like, so what you had on Thursday, on Wednesday night, and then into Thursday, and to an extent since then, was Republicans. I think Republicans were already set to turn on Trump a bit on Wednesday because the Georgia Senate runoffs were over, and they were basically, I think, holding their fire on Trump until they didn't want to turn on Trump before he could tell his base, "Don't turn out for the Georgia Senate elections. They've betrayed me." So they were kind of holding off. And so Wednesday was the first day in about 5 years or 4 years, 5 years-ish, that the Republican Party, the Republican establishment, Mitch McConnell, had no use for Donald Trump. In the last time this was the case was early in the 2016 primary, when you had the National Review criticizing him. You had Rubio calling him a con man. You had Lindsey Graham saying how awful he was. Mulvaney. They were trashing Trump until he secured the nomination, and he became, okay, well, Trump is the only thing standing between us and a Hillary Clinton presidency. And then since then, it's been, okay, well, Trump has the power to enact our agenda, so we tolerate his corruption. He signs our bills. On Wednesday, it became, for the first time, we have no use for this guy. In fact, we want to do whatever we can to regain control of the party apparatus. We don't want him being our 2024 nominee.
And for people that was already. For people who want to read you on this, that's your recent article. The GOP leaders are ditching Trump. Will his base ditch them? Yeah. Just letting people know. People want to read your take on this, but by all means, continue.
Yeah. So, so they were already moving that way, but then the Capitol insurrection happens. Trump puts them all in mortal danger, and I believe during the siege, while the lawmakers are cowering from terrorists, I believe that he calls Tommy Tuberville to try to lobby him to vote against he's still just like lobbying them on voting against the electors and not asking how they are while he's watching on. Anyway, so I mean, he pisses them off. Yeah. People don't like it when you sick terrorists on them. So and
it's funny that he told him to go over, and then he went back to the White House and just chilled. That's the best part. I'm going to join you over there. Then he didn't even show up.
Yeah. So basically, the Republican leadership condemned the riots. A lot of Republican lawmakers, senators, conservative ones have called for Trump to resign or said that they were open to impeachment. They've really condemned him and the insurrection. And they did that before, we got much public opinion data on where the Republican base is. But basically, my view is that at the very least, we got polls out today from Quinnipiac, which showed, I think, 70%, 70+% of Republican voters still support Trump, believe that the election was rigged, believe that the protesters were trying to protect democracy. And so at the very least, a large minority of the Republican base, I think a majority, cares more and is more invested in Donald Trump than they are in the rest of the Republican Party. They have an emotional connection to Trump that they don't have to other Republicans. They consider themselves Trump supporters first, Republicans second. And now you have this situation where the former leader of the party it's not clear that he has any investment in the Republican Party's success as an institution. And we know about him personally that he has more rage against people who are on his side and that he feels betrayed him than his enemies, right? I mean, Jeff Sessions, like the shit that he gave that guy, like if he thinks that you've betrayed him, he goes ahead and tries to, make your life a living hell. So if Trump goes scorched earth on the Republican Party in retirement, this could be a major disruptive factor that I don't know that really tanks the party.
And the banning of him from Twitter plays a big wrinkle in that, because if he was still on Twitter, he'd really have a good bully pulpit to just throw sand in the Republicans' gears for a while. And I'm really curious what he's going to do with that ban. But I'm sorry, you were still going. I heard you were about to say something else.
Yeah, no, that's a good point about the ban. I'm not sure. I think he's maybe going to try to launch his own media network. It's unclear,
Yeah.
It's also unclear if he's going to be put in prison. It's unclear if he's going to just go crazy very quickly and really off the wall. It's uncrazy. It's unclear if he's unclear what's going on.
And you made a pretty impassioned pitch for him to be impeached. I was surprised by how impassioned you were. You did a New York Mag article about. I mean, I agree with you, but it was very, in no uncertain terms. There was no attempt at objectivity. You just were saying, and if you could just mention that real quick.
Sure. Well, yeah. I think it's
self-explanatory, but
yeah. I mean, I think the idea that once you once you incite a terrorist attack on the against the process that certifies the peaceful transfer of power, you probably shouldn't remain in office. And this is something that the National Association of Manufacturers, I think other corporations, sponsors of the party, have said Trump should resign or be impeached. So yeah. I mean, I think the ultimate, I think the last line of the piece, though, gestures at what my real intention, which is that I think that despite how obvious it is that he should be impeached, it was already, when I wrote that on Wednesday afternoon, clear to me, and it's been confirmed since, that Republicans are not going to remove him from office. And so I think that the Democrats, the Democratic Party, moderate Democrats, need to think about what that means and have that inform how they govern. As far as, in my view, Democrats need to need to pass democracy expanding reforms that make it so that the conservative movement doesn't have such a advantage in terms of how it's overrepresented in the Senate and the Electoral College, by, among other things, adding DC and Puerto Rico as states, if Puerto Rico wants to join, also Virgin Islands as a state, whatever. But anyway, point is that, like, in light of the fact that accept that your opposition is so depraved that it is going to keep in power a guy who just incited an attack that almost killed them, themselves, and adjust from there. Yeah.
And real quick, I just mentioned this in passing, is iSoundInfo said this: I'm curious how Trump-inspired violence will play out at the state level. The violent randos have been running up in state houses for a minute, and I put it on screen accidentally too early, but someone sent me this article while we were talking just now, like literally during this interview, that ABC News reports that, according to the FBI, armed protests are planned in all 50 states between now and Inauguration Day. And supposedly it's all 50 states capital, all 50 state capitals, and a return to the U.S. Capitol, according to an internal memo that I guess was leaked. I don't know if you've had a chance to hear about it yet or what, but that literally just broke, to me at least. So to iSoundInfo's point, I think that might be partially the answer, or an indication at least.
Yeah, no, I saw the headline earlier. I hadn't had a chance to read much about it.
Yeah,
but
I haven't either.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was something that was that I was worried about, though. If they can't secure the U.S. Capitol, these state capitol buildings, like we so underfund state government. A lot of these state legislatures, they pay their state legislators like $19,000 a year or something. Like these state capitals are not well secured. They do not have like really excellent security around them, and so yeah, I mean, they're all soft targets. And I don't know. I mean, it's very unclear. Maybe things will quiet down, but it seems like there's a pretty significant chance that actually we've got like an insurgency on our hands, and that this is going to be an ongoing crisis. And I mean, there's a lot of guns out there. So
a lot, and a lot of people are itching to use them. One of the ironies is that we were told that Trump's election was going to be this huge emboldening force for violence, and I think that degree, the degree to which that was going to happen, was kind of overstated, because honestly, even under Obama, a lot of these same things were happening, including with like police brutality and all these other things. But it looks like, it turns out, him winning and being deposed might end up, the thing that the deposing was what we were told was gonna reduce the incentive. I think it might actually, and this is not me making an argument to keep him in. Like, I'm not saying keep him in to avoid this violence, but I'm saying, ironically, like this feeling, because I think there's a rush to kind of say this chapter is closed. It's done. That was The Empire Strikes Back. Now it's Return of the Jedi. It's all wrapped up. It's whatever. And I think it's on the way out that we might end up seeing a lot of the promised emboldening that we were warned about. And at the very same time, the media is trying to actually say the opposite. Like, Biden won and it's done. It's celebration time.
Yeah, well, I think, to be fair, I think a lot of people who predicted violence were concerned about this specific scenario, that once you have given Trump the platform of a major party presidential nominee, I think that something I was worried about in 2016 was like, okay, at the time I was like, Hillary Clinton's probably going to win, but like, Jesus, like, what's going to happen when she does? Like, he's got these right-wing freaks like so riled up, they're going to go nuts. And he gave that quote about Second Amendment people taking action on the Supreme Court if Hillary is allowed to appoint justices. And so I think that then other people, just like with 4 years in the bully pulpit of the presidency, what's going to happen when he leaves. So I think that was kind of part of the fear with Trump the whole time. But I totally agree with you that we've seen the consistent pattern that that under Democratic presidents, the far right tends to get more active. You know, it was under Clinton that we saw the Oklahoma City bombing and a real blossoming of the militia movement. Early in Obama's the election of an African-American president, there was the report released by the Department of Homeland Security saying that Obama's election had spurred a real recruitment boom for white supremacist groups, which was buried because Republicans didn't like the idea that there was a right-wing terrorist threat. But yeah, so I think you're totally right that the I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens, but I fear that Wednesday was the beginning of something, not the culmination.
Yeah, I agree. And something you've been talking about, tracking week by week, is the stimulus battle, and you've been making predictions and assessments on how it plays out and how it's going to play out. The $600 plan, the $2,000 plan, and the battle. And I found it pretty helpful because I had trouble kind of figuring out who to credit and blame for what. And I was curious if you could summarize what you think the biggest takeaways are as far as how the stimulus battle played out. I know this is a pretty broad, open-ended question, but how the stimulus battle played out from the end of the election to now, because one thing I'm wondering is the degree to which people are focusing on Nancy Pelosi and them trying to block a stimulus from happening to hurt Trump. But I was wondering about the extent to which the Republicans were kind of sick of him, you know, to a degree also wanted to hurt his chances. But yeah, if you can give us your thoughts just in general and how you see it playing out in the first 100 days of Biden's presidency.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think, I think Republicans wanted Trump to win the election. Ultimately, I think that they're, you know, maybe aspects of the party, sections of the party are more ambivalent because of their dislike of Trump and wanting to sort of get power back from the Trump family. But, you know, a president in the White House means jobs for everybody in the conservative movement networks, means more judges. So I think that they wanted to win. There was just and they could have, if they said yes to, I mean, basically Democrats offered a trade where, like, okay, you let us fulfill our policy goals. Like you pass a really liberal stimulus that delivers for all of our constituencies, and we'll let you have the political benefit of passing a giant stimulus when your guy is up on the ballot. When they didn't take yes in like May and June and July on those terms, when it got closer to the summer, late summer, early fall, and then Mnuchin tried to meet them a little bit less than halfway with the $1.8 billion offer that Mitch McConnell never endorsed, so it's not 100% clear how real it was. And there might be some element where they wanted, where the White House wanted basically to get a deal with Democrats, but without passing it, but to show that we tried or something. I don't know. When it got to there was a point where I think that it looks like Pelosi decided that, you know, she wasn't going to take anything less than everything that she wanted because she didn't want to help Trump win re-election. I think that probably, I think the evidence suggests that probably happened, and that in the immediate term hurt a lot of vulnerable people by not taking that offer. At the same time, it does seem retrospectively, given how close the margins were in some of the swing states, and given the polling that we've seen on the credit that voters gave Trump on the economy, I think it's pretty plausible that that he might have won re-election if they did take the deal. Either way, since then, you know, Democrats agreed to that $900 billion deal, which was an interesting environment where neither side could be totally sure who was going to control the Senate next year. And I think that made the case. I argued that Democrats should take the $900 billion deal absolutely, because Georgia hadn't happened yet, and it's inadequate, but it's what's on the table. It's what you can get right now. If Republicans win those Senate elections and they know they control the Senate, you're probably going to get less. If you win the Senate, then you can come back and do more. So I was in favor of the deal, and now Democrats won. And I think that my understanding is that we'll see how it plays out. Right now, Joe Manchin has expressed skepticism about the $2,000 checks, but he's notably, unlike sort of the moderate objections in 2009, which were about just spending less. It was about, we can't afford to spend whatever. His is more focused on, it sounds like he would rather spend a lot on UI or on infrastructure or jobs or whatever, but is open to the argument. Anyway, it seems to me like probably, I don't know. We'll see what happens. It sounds to me like where we're headed is there'd be another round of checks, but with tighter means testing requirements on who's eligible, is what it sounds like Manchin probably is asking for. And then Biden has said that basically, he wants the checks quickly, wants aid for states and local governments, sort of the stuff that was missing from the COVID relief package that they got in the fall in terms of Democratic demands. And then he wants to come back with a $3 billion stimulus, which includes his whole climate plan as sort of the second round of it, which is more focused less on relief and more on rebuilding the economy in a green direction and financing it all through deficit spending, which is very encouraging if it happens, but we'll see.
Yeah, it is encouraging. Something that worries me, and I don't know how reactive Biden is to the news cycle as a president in general, because we haven't seen him as a president yet. But one thing I'm curious about, I know he's a big austerity guy. I'm wondering, I feel like this bubble, someone could argue that the economy has been in one giant run-up bubble since 2008. Some people feel that strongly about it, that it's just been, growth has been treated as an inevitability and everything is called a breather. It's not even corrections anymore. They're just called breathers whenever something dips. But even in the spite of all this madness, and I think honestly, even this Dow Jones / S&P bubble, it's not even a real market-wide bubble, because if you look at most of the stocks in the Dow Jones and the S&P, most of them actually have gone down. It's really the so-called FANG stocks and Tesla. It's really a really small bubble. It's like a 6-stock large cap bubble that's floating everything up. But the way the news cycle and a lot of politicians act is, as long as those two big metrics, the S&P and the Dow, are doing good, you can say or pretend the economy is doing good. And Trump has been governing as if the economy is doing great, when in actuality, with jobs, with everything, it hasn't. And one thing I'm curious about, I really want to see, is if that bubble does burst during Biden's time, what his response is going to be, because we don't really have a track record for who he is under those circumstances. I don't think, on a national level. But I was wondering if you know enough about his beliefs and politics to be able to make that kind of predictions, if he's going to go extra on the austerity, if he's going to sign huge bailouts like Obama did. If he had to, given the limited information we had, make a guess what that would mean for his first 100 days.
Sure. So there are a few things there. One is that my understanding of Biden is as a weather vane. He's a guy who got into politics because he liked giving speeches. I think of him as kind of an actor. He's kind of a character actor who has kind of mastered this sort of everyman talking common sense kind of character that they're different, like a character actor does, sort of different versions of it in different eras. Sometimes it's a little bit more angry and anti-crime. He's now more kind of avuncular in his old age, or gentle. But it's the same sort of thing. He's not an intellectual. He doesn't have strong policy beliefs. He ran his first campaign for the Senate. He ran as a liberal who was pro-busing, and took a liberal position on a bunch of things. Then he saw in his district, opinion was shifting slightly, saw some people lose. We forget, I think, that Delaware is not like a deep blue state for most of the time that Biden represents it. And he survives in a lot of cycles that are really bad for Democrats. So he's sort of very, very attentive to public opinion or where the wind seems to be blowing. Sometimes he tries to get ahead of it. So going extra hard on anti-crime and incarceration, he kind of sees the wind going there and he really heads to it. Right now, the opinion among the technocratic elite, if you read what the IMF, the OECD, everyone is saying is, we really overestimated how much deficits matter. Really, what we need to do is we're in a deflationary context, and we really need to spend. It's important. Interest rates are low, so it's actually valuable to borrow money now, build up your infrastructure, take care of your immediate needs. That's going to leave you wealthier in the long run. That's the technocratic opinion right now. And Biden said that last week in his speech. He said there's this consensus among economists that we need to do more deficit spending. And so he's just following that. And Biden, as a political creature, if he is made to believe that there actually is free money on the table, that we actually need more demand in the economy and we can just give out checks to everybody, we can give out pork to all of the senators, I think that until someone convinces him that that's not the case, he's going to be inclined to do that. The other thing that we're seeing, as far as what we saw, the opinion among technocratic elites, perhaps not coincidentally, aligns with a shift in opinion among sort of Wall Street traders and analysts. So we saw when Manchin earlier last week, said that he wasn't convinced about the $2,000 checks, the stock market immediately went down. Because right now stocks want stimulus. Stocks, the retailers, they want cash in people's hands. And so right now the stock market is on the side of those who want to see a full employment economy and stimulus. I think that the risk, to the extent that there's a risk of what you're saying, again, I think Biden's a weather vane. So if the political winds turn towards austerity, he's going to go with it. I don't think that's going to happen. The one risk that I can see is that if we do another round of checks already, and I don't think there's going to be a stock market crash, by the way. I think that the financial system, I don't know, who knows? There's a lot of, we're in such a crazy moment. But
I don't think so either. Wait, I'm sorry, before you continue, I just want to know, do you think there won't be a crash or correction? Because I feel like people have different definitions for both. Right. So I just want to clarify before you continue.
There might be a correction, especially if the pandemic trajectory is really mysterious right now, as far as we had the vaccine come out and it seemed like we were on a very short road to kind of getting over this. And now potentially the spread of this more infectious strain might be outpacing the spread of the vaccine, in which case we could have our hospital systems crash in a month. And,
I definitely agree that a crash is not likely, but I think a correction might be. No,
I think a correction is possible. But you have right now actually, there's a large minority of the public who has gotten completely fucked, utterly financially devastated. And then there's the majority of households, and then especially the upper middle class, who are doing better than ever. It's a very strange economic environment that we have. The personal savings rate, the net worth of American households are at all-time highs. We throw more stimulus into there when everyone is vaccinated, when it is safe to engage in all of these forms of consumption that we haven't gotten to in a long time, when everyone in America at the same time is suddenly itching for a vacation, itching to get on a plane, go to a hotel, go out to eat, go to a concert. Everyone hasn't done it in a year and a half. There might be a moment where the demand for these goods and services outstrips the supply, because so many of the hotels have closed, restaurants, whatever, airlines have laid off workers. They don't have the capacity yet to actually meet this sudden surge in demand. And that could produce inflation in a surge of inflation that's just temporary, short term, but that would be latched onto by Republicans and by Austerians and fiscal conservatives to try to drum up fear about about the deficit. So that's a path I could see towards Biden potentially turning, but I don't think it's that likely. I think it'll be interpreted by the Fed and others as related to just short-term supply constraints. But we'll see.
I think you're right. And something you just said, I've been reading a lot of your articles in a short amount of time, so sometimes I don't always remember which article I read what in, but I think it was in the one $2,000 stimulus checks are poorly targeted, and that's fine, where you made the point in more detail that you just made just now, which is that as bad as the economy is for the person on the ground, the average person in America is not as hard hit by this as you would think if they were already employed and they were not in the service industries. A lot of people have managed to hold on to their jobs, and a lot of people have managed to be switched to work at home. So a lot of like your average person is at home, still working, still hanging on, and whatever. I think it's very important to keep that in mind, because I think that's why you haven't really seen, like, as bad as the carnage is on the ground, that's why you haven't really seen like this revolutionary call for forget everything, socialized medicine. We need to change like a lot of people thought like this was gonna be what was gonna push Bernie Sanders over the edge. Like people are finally gonna run into socialism, and yeah, I mean, it's not really a question so much as telling people check out that article, because you drop some numbers that really kind of make clear that the stock market is very divorced from the situation on the ground. But on top of that, the numbers shown in the situation on the ground, the suffering isn't as spread out as you might think. And I thought that was very, I thought that was a very good point. That
no, I think it's really important if you want to understand the political context. So actually, I just pulled up in September of 2020. So yeah, just a few months ago, middle of the pandemic, and actually just a couple months after the CARES Act supports began to phase out. Americans were asked, "Are you better or worse off now than 4 years ago?" And 56% said they were better off now than they were 4 years ago, implicitly financially. And this is the highest percentage since at least 1984. So it's important to remember that a lot, an unprecedented number of people lost their jobs last year. When you include all the people who are temporarily laid off and furloughed. But a majority of people who were employed at the start of 2020 were still employed at the end. And the typical household did not lose employer income, did get a $1,200 check from the government they weren't expecting, and did suddenly start spending way less money. Right, because they couldn't do any of the fun things that they wanted to do. They save money on gas.
Yeah, even commuting to work. Yeah.
Yeah, they save money on gas. They save money on lunch. They save money on, and so credit card debt is at a close to a record low. I think. They basically, if you didn't get hit by the disaster, you ended up in a position where, American households are better off financially than ever before. But if you did get hit, then you're fucked. Yeah. You lost your small business that was not insured and you didn't get the PPP funds. If you had trouble signing up for unemployment insurance because the UI systems in most states are like designed to deny people coverage or to make it impossible logistically, and they're all like in COBOL coding language that's outmoded. Millions and millions of people are completely left in the cold, but the majority was not. The majority is good financially. Is dealing with. I mean, the pandemic's been hell for everybody in one way or another. But
the last thing that I wanted to talk about, well, I just want to say a quick side to what you said. Using personal anecdote, I've done better since it hit, because I managed to maintain my employment, but I don't have to commute. Nobody invites me anywhere. In New York, being invited to social events that you feel obligated to go to because of family and friends, $100, $200 here and there going out, all that's gone. And yeah, I just sit at home all day. And then, if anything, I've made extra income from doing podcasting and shows and etc. And a lot of people are in the same boat. But your article really drove that home. A perfect segue to our final topic is you were talking about the technocratic elites and their role in what Biden's going to do. Now, this was an article I was on the fence about talking about because with this, we have a podcast and we have a live stream, and we like to use the live stream for more topical things and the podcast for, kind of more big picture stuff. And this was, I thought, a very good big picture topic. And maybe we can still have a podcast episode at some point talking about this. But I think it's also very timely and of the moment, especially with the way the economy is going and with the input that technocratic elites are going to have in the very near future with government policy. And this is an article you had that says America has central planners. We just call them venture capitalists. And I would love to end with a quick summary of that article. And it's pinned to the top of your Twitter account, so you clearly think it's an important article to keep in the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah, no, I just felt good about it, so I pinned it. Yeah, so the headline is kind of, playful exaggeration, but the conceit of the article basically was looking at what, conservatives said about when Solyndra, the solar panel company that got some stimulus funds from the Obama administration, failed, what they said about how that illustrated the pathologies of public government investment, and how the government just doesn't know how to invest money, the way that the private sector does. And I was reading this New Yorker deep dive into the venture capitalists who funded WeWork, the workplace work share company that basically their business model was to lease real estate, commercial real estate from landlords, and then curate the spaces in like a hip way, and then rent them to companies that were looking for relatively cheap, flexible terms on office space, but in a kind of tech disruptive way, sort of market to tech startups and stuff. And basically, you just look at how WeWork and Uber is an even better and more consequential example. But basically what they show is that when conservatives criticize government planning, government industrial planning, they lean on the idea that in the private sector, investors and companies and firms are disciplined by the market mechanism, by the price mechanism. You can't succeed as a business just because you're well connected, like maybe somebody who, a government crony is. At the end of the day, if you're not providing value to consumers, you're going to fail. You need to make the profit is the way that we're going to decide whether or not your enterprise continues to exist. And that there's a kind of democracy in that. If we ignore the fact that, that different people have way different amounts of money. And so, if you concentrate money at the top, then what is going to be a profitable idea is going to be very different than in a society where wealth is spread out more evenly. Nonetheless, even on that level, it just doesn't work because we have venture capital. I mean, it's just one example of how this happens, but it's very stark, where WeWork was never a profitable company, and yet it was able to grow to become one of the largest, maybe the largest work-share company in the world, have a footprint on every major continent, and Uber is the same way, and not because, not because it ever turned a profit. It was because there's a sort of a kind of cabal But basically a bunch of people who are, not centrally planning, but planning large sectors of the economy, who are in Silicon Valley and have that authority not because they've been elected or appointed, but because they've accrued a massive amount of capital. They know each other and they coordinate, and they chose who was going to be the big company in the workshare space. Once a few of them got on board with Adam Neumann and WeWork, there were other entrepreneurs in the area who had more sort of limited plans for a similar thing, and said that VCs would stop funding them because they already picked their company. Just like to a certain extent, they picked a rideshare service in Uber, and basically, put their competitors out of business because, both WeWork and Uber were able to offer services to the consumers below market cost. So if you weren't connected, if you weren't a chosen one of the VC, and you were trying to compete in this space, you were put out of business because you were trying to compete against somebody who didn't need to turn a profit, who could afford to lose tens of millions of dollars.
Yep.
And so there you have industrial planning. It's just not democratic, but it is industrial planning.
Something that I like that you say in this article is that you mention you keep calling them venture capitalists, and I like venture capitalists better than Silicon Valley or tech companies, even though there is a lot of overlap. A lot of venture capital, if it's a Venn diagram, it's a huge overlap with Silicon Valley, has a huge overlap with technology companies. And you point this out very well with things like Uber and WeWork. They're not really tech companies. People kind of think of them as tech companies, and they do have maybe a lot of tech integrated into their model, but it's really about capital. It's venture capital, and that's what really ties these people together. A lot of these companies are not really technological at all. They're like the WeWork thing. People were calling it a tech company all the time. We're treating it like a tech company, and I think what people are sensing is a shared aesthetic, and then they mislabel that shared aesthetic tech. But something else that I noticed that these companies have in common is this kind of great men of history view of business. Like, whether it's this lionization of Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, like Tesla is the car company version of this, where it's got like the skinniest of profit margins. It's not the most fundamentally sound company at all, but people have in their mind convinced themselves it's a tech company. It has like the hallmarks of like venture capital and tech companies and how it appears, and people have made in their mind Elon Musk into Tony Stark. He's like a secret agent, international superhero man, inventor, and it's crazy the amount of power that all these people, whether it's Bezos, Musk, etc., all these people have. But in addition, the regular people really buy into these people in a way. Like, they're not democratically elected in any way, but they do have a weird popular support. Like, the people who love Elon Musk, the regular Joes, and view him as aspirational, it's so bizarre to me.
Yeah, I will say that there is. I don't think any of these people should be worshipped. I think most, we should have some contempt for. But there is like a distinction, I think, between Bezos and Musk to a certain extent, who are so. There are a lot of problems with Amazon, but Amazon is popular because it provides a very good service. Especially for people like in kind of smaller areas, to be able to get like almost any book to your door like in 2 days, or any product basically at all. People like it for a reason, and I think Amazon is a good, like, I want it to be state owned and operated, and its profits to be distributed to all of us in a dividend or something. But the infrastructure that it's helped to put together is solid. I like it. And Musk, to his credit, is at least like trying to invest in like technology, green technology, like interesting sort of things. You have then, but then you have like Uber, WeWork, where like it's just Uber. The model is like just to establish. It's just a plot for rent seeking, where like let's all collaborate, lose money on rides for a few years, establish a monopoly, and then like jack up the prices or something. And then I mean it doesn't really make. I mean it's convenient. Potentially there are cities with poor mass transit where it really does provide a big value add relative to what they had before. But it's not a good solution for transit in the city, like overall. And WeWork is just like it's a middleman between landlords and renters. It's not a very innovative business
At
at
all.
all. And then you have like I don't know, and even like Facebook, where it's probably a negative value add to the world, like for Facebook to exist. I mean, so
Facebook is the worst. It's the third attempt at a service that's not even to me like the best at. It's like Friendster, MySpace, then Facebook. I don't even understand what Mark Zuckerberg gets credited as being the inventor of. This is like he just refined something that was done twice and just was more ruthless about it and had a better network, I guess, being at Harvard. It's a very but he's another one that people will. I mean, thankfully he's so boring that I think even the people who worship Elon Musk can't really muster up the energy to worship him the same. But even then, he still gets kind of treated as this great businessman that I think is very unwarranted.
Yep. No, I agree.
Yeah, but I really think that that's going to be something that's going to be an increasing problem. And I think in addition to it being an increasing problem, what scares me more about it is the average Joe doesn't even really care because they're viewed as so inspirational, like in this kind of hustle and grind culture that online's really focuses. I joined the app Clubhouse, and Clubhouse is interesting because you get to sit in on a lot of VCs talk amongst themselves. And one thing that's amazing is they're even drier in conversation with each other than I thought. But the second thing that surprised me is a lot of them really believe in what they do is almost a moral calling. It's not just cynical business. They have a weird kind of moralistic ethos to this idea that they're adding value to the world through their rent-seeking projects and all the initiatives that they do. And what was really interesting about it is how many people are like, give me tips. What can I do? And they're giving like almost lifestyle guru advice to regular Joes on Clubhouse all the time. And it was really unnerving to me to realize how many people view these people as aspirational people. I want to make the next app. I want to work for the next app. If I can't make the next app, I want to be part of this culture. This culture is the future, and I want it. It's sexy. I want to be part of it. So yeah, I think people aren't even alarmed by any of this. Is what scares me.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just that there are like some places where you are adding value, and people have creative energies. They I mean, like I think it's a noble impulse in some ways, what you're describing, and we don't have. It's not like we have like we don't finance. We don't have nearly enough public investment and public financing of research and development directed at like actual social problems that are not necessarily profitable. Because I think we want people to have entrepreneurial energies to a certain extent and aspire to like I want to create something cool and new that's going to make life better for people. Like I think that's a great sort of reservoir of energy. But yeah, in our society, in our culture, the people that the model that we give to people for where to direct that energy and who to model themselves after and it's in the private sector Silicon Valley space that is for the most part not actually innovating stuff that's going to make the world better.
Yeah, and I do think you're right that in some way it's almost like I look at them kind of differently, seeing that they actually believe to me that they're doing good, but it almost makes it more tragic at the same time. Like they're a little more sympathetic that they actually seem to believe it, but also like more tragic. This is the last thing I'm going to read before we go. A small corporate white elite has been able to catalyze their influence in American culture more and more firmly. Gary V is a good case example. That's Gary Vaynerchuk. Yeah, that guy is all over Clubhouse. Yeah, people like him, Tim Ferriss, they have their own even media ecosystem of people who kind of promote their stuff to the average guy. That's a great point because I'm always trying different podcasts, and you have like Tim Ferriss, Gary Vaynerchuk, this guy Jocko Willink, and Joe Rogan, and all these people that really almost act as intermediaries to the middleman for these people that really kind of help sell their image. Elon Musk was on Joe Rogan smoking a blunt, and this makes him look really relatable. That's a great point. But anything that you wanna, any last thoughts you want to give, predictions, articles you have coming up you think people would be interested in, inauguration and first 100-day predictions you want to get on the record, or whatever
Yeah,
you have
no,
the floor.
I think I'm pretty exhausted, so I think I'm working on something about this really sort of interesting tension that conservatives are facing in the aftermath of the Trump Twitter ban and the Amazon taking Parler off its web services and stuff, where and this has been happening for a while, but it greatly accelerated in the last 48 hours of conservatives discovering that private power exists and that actually the decisions of private businesses have implications for our public, social, and political lives, and really sort of struggling to reconcile that with everything else that they believe. So yeah, I'm working on something on that, but so you can keep your eyes out for that if you want.
Great. So yeah, check out Eric on Twitter. It's just Eric Levitz, right? If I remember correctly, I don't have it on my screen.
Just have my name, yep.
Yeah. Just it's Eric Levitz, and that's basically it. Yeah. And also check him out on New York Magazine. Keep an eye out for that. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate your patience. I know this is a long one and it's a dreary Monday, but definitely appreciate it. And everyone, thanks for joining us. And Vita's doing a stream later later tonight, so definitely check that out. Have a good one, everybody. Bye.